Cześć, hello, witam, and welcome to Pierogi to Prayer, the official podcast of St. Joseph's Polish Apostolate of the Diocese of Camden, coming to you from our historic home at 1010 Liberty Street in Camden, New Jersey, the heart of South Jersey's Polonia for over 130 years. I am your host, Michael Matalevich. A wonderful saying from Krakow is, if you want to know a real Pole, ask him to sing and dance the Krakowiak. So quotes the legendary Polish-American entertainer Bobby Vinton during his narration of a 2007 recorded performance of Mazowsze, Poland's national folk dance and song ensemble. This group, in existence since the 1950s, is recognized the world over for its public exhibition of traditional Polish folk music and dance. Performing scores of shows annually across Poland and the world, Mazowsze has captivated audiences and inspired the performance quality of other groups all around the globe in communities where Poles have settled. Mazowsze's vast repertoire showcases dozens of Polish dances, of which, according to the famous Midwestern choreographer Ada Dziewanowska in her book Polish Folk Dances and Songs, there are over 80 approximate varieties. Polish dancing tradition is truly breathtaking in its enormity, and it weaves together nearly all elements of Poland's history and culture, delighting those who witness performances and participate in them. On a micro level, I'm sure that anyone who has grown up in a Polish household knows that Vinton's quote rings true, for between its many festivals, celebrations, and just everyday domestic life, the musical element of Polish identity is nearly always present in one form or another. Given this long association with Polish cultural identity, we thought it appropriate to devote an episode to this all-important Polish folk dancing heritage. As you will soon hear, our guests today, Peter and Andrea Shaefer, are a couple who have been both dance and life partners for most of their adult lives. Both natives of Chicago, the metropolis widely recognized as the largest Polish city outside of Warsaw, their depth of knowledge and hands-on experience with this facet of Polish culture is impressive, to say the least. Listening to them describe their experiences of Polish heritage through their dancing was a privileged discussion to be a part of. I'm sure that their expressed enjoyment of it, as well as their warmth and passion, will show through in the words that follow. Also, given dance and music's strong centrality to Polish history and culture, we thought it appropriate that this month feature the grandfather, so to speak, of Polish saints for our Saint of the Month reflection piece, whose feast day also happens to occur this month in April. Be sure to stick around after the interview for his story. For now, however, we invite you to grab your dance partner and join us for this wonderful discussion of Polish dance with Peter and Andrea Shaefer. So, Peter and Andrea, thank you so very much for being on Pierogi to Prayer. We're delighted to have you with us today. We'll start out by just sort of introducing yourselves, a little bit about you, where you're from, and and then we'll get into our interesting topic here of Polish dance.
Glad to be here, Michael. I'm Andrea Shaefer, and my husband's Peter. We both grew up in Chicago. Peter grew up on the west side of the city, and I grew up on the southwest side. And we attended colleges and graduate schools in Chicago. And we moved to New Jersey in about 1996, and we've been here ever since.
Oh, that's great. So I know that you're both very much involved with Polish folk dancing right now, but you have been for a long time. That's correct. So kind of where did that start? What was the origin story, so to speak, of your getting into Polish dance?
Yes, so I think in both our cases, we started very young. So speaking for myself, my parents sent me to Polish school. We didn't cover Polish language, but we did singing and dancing. So I did learn some of the language through the singing. And as far as the dancing goes, I learned all the basics, starting in middle school and throughout high school. And I decided to stay with it because I enjoyed it so much, even throughout college. And that is actually how we met. And Andrea could give you more details on that.
Yeah, I love dancing. I always have. And I began taking ballet lessons starting around the age of 3. And I haven't ever really stopped dancing. My parents sent me to a Saturday Polish morning school sponsored by the Polish National Alliance. And we had lessons in language, singing, and dancing. And of course, my favorite part was the dancing. So in high school, I joined the Lyra Singers, the Lyra Ensemble of Chicago. It's the only professional ensemble in the United States dedicated to performing and promoting Polish folk and classical music. So it began as a women's chorus, a women's chamber chorus, small chorus, but later it included men and a small orchestra and dancers. And that's how I met my husband. I was a singer, he was a dancer, and the choreographer would partner us up performance after performance. And eventually I became a lyra dancer too.
That's such a terrific story just to have that bridge between your childhood and then into your adulthood in college. And so I guess on that, there's a lot of things that parents force their kids to get into when they're young, one way or another. Why why did you continue with it? Because there's people who drop off on it. I mean, there's people play sports and drop out of it, or whatever the case may be that their parents kind of force them into. What was it about Polish dance that made you continue with it into your adult life?
Well, in my case, I really did enjoy it. I think I realized I enjoyed it when I realized that it was a group activity. I could kind of have more of an artistic outlet, something to do other than sports, but as a group. And I think that because of the enjoyable aspects of it, the performing has a certain level of excitement and learning new things, performing it well with a group. You get a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. I just sort of continued with it along those lines. And also because my older siblings were involved, as well as my younger siblings. So I joined a group that Andrea mentioned called Polonez Dancers. This was in the 1980s in Chicago, because my two older sisters were part of the group. And that's the dance group that later became the Lyra Dancers as part of the greater Lyra ensemble. But in my younger days, I was actually learning and then instructing at the Polish Roman Catholic Union of America in Chicago. And during college, I was asked to be an instructor for the group. And so, when you're asked to take on responsibility and contribute your time in that way, and I felt like that was something I could do to give back to the community. And so I did that. Every weekend I'd come home from college, because I lived on campus, but I'd come home to teach the younger kids in the group Krakowiak and Polonez and things like that. So I just felt the sense of accomplishment and contribution that comes with the community activity.
And for me, I think the big draw at first as a little girl was the colorful costumes, because almost every little girl likes to get dressed up in pretty skirts that twirl around and flowers in your hair and sparkly vests. So that's kind of what attracted me to it. But then, and it still does actually, but the lively music is just, it speaks to my soul. And I love performing. I think Poland has the most beautiful dances in the entire world. And there's such a variety of dances. It's incredible. So, when you perform and you're twirling around and you have flowers in your hair, you just get a high from it. It's lots of fun. And that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about that, just this variety aspect of Polish dance. I mean, my interaction with Polish dance has been through, my wife who had already been in PKM for many years. But that was one thing that, even though I grew up Polish, I was struck by too, this sheer variety. And so, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about that, of kind of the background of Polish dance, so to speak, and why it kind of evolved into this multifaceted, for lack of a better term, just variety of dances.
So, Michael, I think we probably could do a whole hour podcast just on this alone. But I'd like to maybe point out some important points here. So a little bit of history. Polish dances date back centuries and are derived from the tribal dances of the Slavic peoples, the Slavic tribes, who inhabited the areas between the Baltic Sea of the north and the Tatra Mountains in the south. And it went as far west as the Odra River and the Bug River in the east. So because of Poland's historically changing borders and because it was a crossroads for trade, foreign influences have helped shape this music and dance. And in turn, Polish had an influence on countries all around it. So currently, Poland has 16 provinces, but historically, there were numerous regions and subregions within each province, and that gives you all that rich variety. The border regions adopted characteristics from the countries next to it, from its neighbors. They adopted their melodies and their dance steps, their instruments, traditional clothing, right? So all that, the artwork, the embroidery, all that was influenced by the borders. And in the north and the west, we can see the German and the Scandinavian influences. And in the east, you can see the Ukrainian influence. In the south, Czech and Hungarian influences are there. So all this being said, though, there are two basic categories of Polish dancing. The national dances, and these are the dances that spread all throughout the country, and the folk dances that remain mostly regional. So if you want to talk about national dances, there are 5 national dances: the Krakowiak, Kujawiak, Oberek, Mazur, and Polonez. And all these dances began with the folk. They began with the peasantry and later were adopted by the nobility across the country and across other countries too. For example, the Polonez began as a peasant walking dance called the chodzony. It was introduced in the 17th century, I think it was, to France and to the French courts, and they loved the Polonez and they called it the Polonaise. Russia admired the fiery Mazur and they called it the mazurka. So the mazurka became the fashionable ballroom dance of its time, and it was danced all across Europe. A hard dance, though it is, was danced all across Europe. So even the famous composers that included the Polonaise and the Mazur in their works, such as Tchaikovsky, Moniuszko, Ravel, Debussy, just to name a few. And of course, we must not forget to mention Chopin. His large body of works often included Polish dance forms. And Chopin's compositions spread like wildfire throughout all of Europe and was familiarizing everyone with the beautiful rhythms and melodies and dances of Poland.
Yeah, it's interesting with my background in history how I think our modern understanding of nation states, they just have existed in this vacuum. And Poland is impossible to understand without the relationship of its neighbors around it. And it's interesting that these dances that are distinctly Polish also have these distinctive elements of the borderlands. Like you said, you have the Ukrainian and the Russian and the German aspects of it. I think it's important to note that how you can look at the history of Poland almost through the dance. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think that's right. You bring up a point about the influence of its neighbors. One of the neighbors being Czech Republic, which is the birthplace of the polka. Now, I happen to have a family background in polka music because my father was a longtime Chicago polka DJ and record producer. He produced over 100 polka records, and he was on the radio for over 65 years as a disc jockey. And one thing that I didn't appreciate until now was that the polka really became adopted as what we would call a Polish American dance and widespread throughout much of the country. We grew up dancing it, many people of our generation, which is our grandparents were from Poland, grew up dancing it. And yet people who live in Poland today don't dance it at all for the most part. And they get confused when they see Polish Americans doing the polka. And if you tell them, well, this is a Polish dance, they actually object and they say, no, it's not, it's Czech. And they sort of disown it. So there is a very different perception of what is a Polish dance and what is not a Polish dance. And it depends on where you were born and when you were born. And, of course, both are correct. Just because something comes from another country doesn't mean it can't be part of the fabric of your own society. And as you know, there's many polkas, especially in the southern regions, the regional dances. Polka is not one of the Polish national dances. But yet, if you go to places like Rzeszów or Nowy Sącz, most of the dances in those regions really are polkas. They have a waltz or two in there, but that's what they do. So I do find it interesting, the influences of the neighboring countries and the cultures that you bring up. Another one to mention would be in the far south of Poland, along the Carpathian Mountains, where the Górale live. You have a very different form of folk dancing where the men and women dance more separately, which is different from most Polish folk dances where men and women dance together in couples virtually all of the time. So I think that, once you start getting into the mountain lands along the Carpathians, around Podhala, Zakopane region, the dance forms are really more similar to that of Slovakia and other countries, that share that same mountain range. And that's because it was really influenced by the Wallachian shepherds, who were the tribe that lived in that region. So there's definitely a strong regional influence, as well as a chronology to what is popular among different waves of immigrants, depending on when you or your ancestors came to the United States.
Yeah, it's having had a similar experience of growing up Polish American. It was Polish dance was the polka only, from what I remember. And then getting into these sort of traditional Polish dances has been really an educational experience. And also how not even just sort of these other countries around it, but the sort of geographical influences. You have the mountains. And I remember reading about some of these communities were really rather isolated. And so some of their dances were a little better preserved, maybe a little unique, even from a village that might be on the other side of the mountain or something. And then you have sort of the Wolvich, the fisherman influence and stuff like that. So it is so dynamic. And I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think there's any other culture that really has this many dances. Is there, to your knowledge?
That would be hard to say because I don't know that much about other cultures' dances. We have done a little bit international folk dancing. What we've noticed about Eastern European dances, they tend to dance separately, men from women, in lines and circles. The same would be true of like Israeli dancing and other Middle Eastern dance forms where men and women don't really dance together. When you go to the far Western Europe, let's say the Celtic countries, Scotland, Ireland, same thing. You don't really see the men and the women dancing together. But yet in Central Europe, where Poland is, Germany, then you see polkas, waltzes, things, and couple dances. Dancing in a couple definitely takes more coordination, communication with your partner.
More practice.
More practice.
More practice.
So, funny side note, we sometimes go to a ballroom dance studio for lessons, and the instructor asked us to do a demonstration of a ballroom dance. And so we surprised her with a mazur. And, of course, no one dances the mazur as a ballroom dance today. And she was watching us perform, and then later on she said, I could see why the mazur died out. It's too difficult. Whereas the waltz, which was actually danced at the same time as a mazur in Europe, it survived, I would say, better to this day. And now you see, Viennese waltz and things like that being a strong component of what we would think of as ballroom dancing. So yes, sometimes it can be challenging, and it is something you have to do on a regular basis in order to do really at all. So that's another, I think, hindrance to some people is, the level of experience or just practice needed to execute some of the steps. But like anything else with practice, you'll eventually get it.
Yeah, and wasn't the mazur in particular? I feel like I remember reading this somewhere that it was it was almost a point of pride for in military regiments to be able to do it, because it took this sort of great physical skill. Do you know anything about that?
Not sure about the military aspects. We've seen these national folk ensembles like Mazowsze and Śląsk, and they do perform Polonez Mazur in Ulan uniforms. So that to me implies soldiers of the day would perform it. But as standalone military units, I would think they would have to find women for partners. So maybe it was more for social occasions.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think about that one.
Later, I decided to go back and fact-check myself on this point about the mazur. Although I wasn't able to locate the exact information that I'd been thinking of during our interview, I did come across a fascinating historical anecdote about this dance, which was mentioned so many times during the course of our discussion. Returning to the book Polish Folk Dances and Songs by Ada Jawanowska, which I cited earlier,
The mazur has its origins as far back as the 15th and 16th centuries. However, for those familiar with Polish history, an important historical episode played out around the mazur that helped give rise to its popularity in 19th and turn of the 20th century ballrooms, as was mentioned by Peter and Andrea. In the late 18th century, the famous Polish legions were formed in Italy under the command of General Jan Dąbrowski. These groups of soldiers gathered to fight for Napoleon, whose French revolutionary principles mirrored their own. In order to curry support from the large Polish population in exile, Napoleon committed to the establishment of the Polish state, which since its partition had disappeared from the map of Europe. Mainly drawn from the szlachta, or Polish aristocracy, the officers of the Polish legions came to dance the mazur in their full-dress military uniforms. In 1797, in the town of Reggio in northern Italy, one of these legionnaires, a poet and patriot named Józef Wybicki, said a poem he had written to an old Mazurek folk tune from Podlasie in northeastern Poland to a military march. He titled it Dąbrowski's March, in honor of his commander. Today this song, beginning with the words, "Poland is not yet lost," is the official Polish national anthem. The dancing of the mazur and this anthem would become hallmarks of Polish independence and patriotic activities over the next century of Poland's occupation.
We've talked a little bit about this variety. We have regional dances, national dances. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
Oh, my favorite, hands down, is the mazur. I like it because it's a dance where the men can be the men and the women can be women. And the men dance proudly and they stamp around, they click their heels, and they're gracious to the women. They let the ladies go first. It's very gentlemanly. For the women, it's very delicate, almost ballet-like. And it's a fast, fiery dance. It's light and breezy, and you glide across the floor, and I think it's just lovely.
What about you, Peter?
Yeah, for me, I would have to say dances of southern Poland, the mountain regions. So my mother's mother came from a town called Rabanizna. It's about halfway between Kraków and Zakopane. The people there, they consider themselves to be górale. Maybe it's in my blood or something, but I just liked it ever since I was young. I had a chance to learn it starting in middle school age and high school. And, in those dances, as I mentioned, the men and women dance separately part of the time, and the boys get to, show off and do some jumps and squats and kicks and things. And so my brother and I would get into that. So that's always been fun. And I've always enjoyed that aspect of just dancing with a group of men. You kind of, not the solo aspect, the exhibition aspect, but just simply dancing in unison with a bunch of guys, having a good time. It's maybe something that is, I find, a little bit lacking from American culture, because in this country, American men typically don't dance. There's almost like a apprehension about it or a reluctance to do it. But I just find it very enjoyable in a way to, experience community life in a way that you really can't in most other places.
For something that, like you said, the mazur being so physically challenging and kind of this sort of in our machismo masculine culture that is sometimes too pervasive. There's like this, oh, well, dance is for someone who's, weak or whatever, when really it's quite the opposite. So being from the Midwest originally and then coming out to the East Coast throughout your lives, do you notice differences in just kind of the either the Polish culture in general that's in the Midwest versus the East Coast, or maybe the dance in particular? Or, I mean, the dances are pretty universal, I guess, but I'm just curious about that, if you have any observations.
Well, one thing I've noticed, so first of all, in Chicago, the Polish community is so large. There's multiple dance groups. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a large degree of participation. The Polish language schools kind of feed in, and it just kind of, I think, builds upon itself. And there's maybe a friendly rivalry, shall we say, between the groups. What I've noticed about the East Coast is maybe the Polish communities are a bit more spread out. They're not concentrated as much. So you've got a community in New York, and we had the opportunity to join the Polish American Folk Dance Company in Brooklyn for a few years in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now we have the privilege of performing with PKM, Polish Folk Dance Ensemble in Philadelphia. Again, a nice community, but smaller than what we're used to. And so I would say you don't have that rivalry here on the East Coast that we had in Chicago. I called it a friendly rivalry, but it can get competitive. I also noticed, because Chicago had a lot of Irish immigrants as well, Irish dancing is very competitive. And in fact, you go to their festivals and they're holding competitions and contests for who can do, I don't know the names of the dances, the best. And so, everyone is kind of seeing the Lord of the Dance and Michael Flatley and these Broadway show type Irish dancing. And yes, it's very well executed. We don't have that in our community, shall we say, but that's fine. I think that it's fine to leave it as a hobby and a social activity without the competition, without the pressure, and without too much rivalry. I think that's what really makes it special and just helps, make life more enjoyable.
Well, I'd like to kind of say something about the other side of that coin, not the differences, but the similarities, in that we came from Chicago and we knew nobody here in New Jersey. And people said, you know what, why don't you join that group in Brooklyn, Polish American Folk Dance Company? And even though we lived 2 hours away from Brooklyn, once a week, twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, if we were performing, we'd go into Brooklyn, and we had an immediate friend group. And people who valued dancing and valued the Polish costumes and valued the Polish culture, just immediately we were taken in like family. And we still have so many of those friends, even though we haven't been dancing for quite a while with the Polish American Folk Dance Company. We still keep up with the friends and see them and everything. And now it's the same thing when we joined PKM. Now we have this wonderful friend group, and it's just a very comfortable place to be. And you continue to perform, you continue to learn, you continue to get something out of it and contribute, and to be immersed in your culture.
Yeah, I imagine that sense of having done well too, even though it's not necessarily in a competitive sense. Here is gratifying to put all this time and all this effort into the practicing, and then to have it pay off in front of whoever, whether it's an audience of half a dozen or a couple hundred at Częstochowa festival, is probably very real.
Oh, absolutely. I know when I perform and I get a little nervous, I look at that as a very good thing. When you're a little nervous, you get a little bit of adrenaline, you focus, you perform well, and then it usually turns out well. If you're not nervous, if you're not self-aware enough, sometimes it doesn't work out as well. The performance aspect I do find enjoyable, and I've often noticed that I enjoy doing Polish folk dancing more than watching it. And I don't know if that's something that other people find as well. It's a very different experience when you're doing it than when you're watching it. Of course, I like watching, groups, but doing it is by far much more engaging. Obviously, you're thinking with your brain and your feet and your hands. You're just, activating so many different parts of your being at the same time. It's just something that you can't get even with, I find, forms of sports, So as a way to continue being active as we get a little bit older, nothing can beat, the benefits of dancing.
Have there been any particular favorite moments over the years? Opportunities that you've been afforded, or maybe memorable events?
Well, yeah, the being in a group like PKM or in Chicago or wherever you are, you have the opportunity to perform in so many different places. For instance, when I was in the Lyra Ensemble, we'd go on concert tours, and I've been on 4 concert tours of Poland. And I would never get to do that if I wasn't with. You can visit Poland, but you don't get into the consulates, and you don't get into see, the Our Lady of Częstochowa and the Black Madonna right in front of her with the priest who is in charge of all of Częstochowa. It's just way too cool. And then, we were here in New York, and we got to perform at big gala occasions at the Waldorf Astoria, at the Plaza Hotel, and we just get into places and see places that as just a regular pedestrian, we would never be able to do.
That's right. That's right. And back when we were with the Lyra Ensemble, one of the most enjoyable aspects of that performing experience was having the live music. We had an orchestra, we had a cappella for the folk music. There was the chorus, the men's chorus, the women's chorus. That was really a privilege and an honor and a really enjoyable experience. And the other thing is definitely when traveling to Poland, every few years they have a festival of Polish folk dance groups from all over the world congregate in Rzeszów. I had the opportunity to attend once in 1987. And there you meet people from other parts of Europe and South America, North America, who are doing Polish dance for the same reasons you are, because you love it. And so you wake up in the morning and you learn some new dances from an instructor, and you have lunch, and then you do it again in the afternoon, and then you go to a dance party at night. It's like dancing morning, noon, and night. And then you have the opportunity to go back, into the villages, perform for the locals. They're thrilled to have guests performing for them. The hospitality was fantastic. And then there's a big show with all the dance groups, and you perform sometimes, a finale with hundreds of other dancers at the same time. So those are the moments that are really memorable and will forever be cherished.
Yeah, managing the social media for the podcast, I knew that there were dance groups around the world because of the Rzeszów Festival. But it's every day pop up like another 15 or 20 of pages to like suggested likes and people that follow us. And it's just, it's kind of mind boggling in a way that it's anywhere from, Australia, South America, kind of everywhere. Like Poles, we've gotten around quite a bit over the years.
The number of groups is just mind boggling.
It really is. It seems like wherever we go, wherever Poles go in the world, one of the first things they do after they set up a Polish church and a Polish school is a Polish dance group. It just does seem that way.
It's true.
Yep.
So there have been some recent challenges to just people getting together in general because of COVID. And dancing is something that is, by its very nature, very interactive. And there's also this kind of sense, I think, that as we sort of become more of a melting pot and we're further removed from the immigrant generation that had these firsthand encounters with their culture over in Poland, that we're starting to decline a little bit. I'm just curious, do you see that as the case? Do you not see that? Are there kind of challenges to dance groups that are performing now as opposed to when you guys first got involved?
Well, it seems like it would always be better to have more members, but I would say I've never been in a dance group that had too many members. It's always been, sort of this always wanting more situation. I guess over the years, when we were dancing with Polish American Folk Dance Company, we certainly went through periods where there were 3 couples active, maybe 4. We'd be lucky to get more than that. And so it kind of waxes and wanes, I think. So I don't think I see a downward trend necessarily, but it is something that I wish more people would take advantage of and participate in.
And I think it kind of cycles around sometimes too. Well, it's really hard for us to judge because we came from Chicago, where there's multiple dance groups, and there seems to be no lack of young people. We're talking high school age, well, actually the feeder groups are the children's groups that feed into the junior high groups, that feed into the teenage groups, that feed into the big groups, right? So you got to have those feeder groups, and that's what helps keep an adult group alive with the feeder groups. So it's hard for us to judge here if it's suffering or not, but well, I think it waxes and wanes. For instance, you have this group of adults, they become 20, they become 30, they get married, they have kids. and then they have to take a hiatus for 18 years, like us. And then you come back to it. So yes, there is life after children. There is Polish folk dancing after children. So it just waxes and wanes, I think.
And you can dance with your children. We did that. We actually performed when our two kids were about between the ages of maybe 5 and 10, something like that. They were troopers, and they're at the age where they just did whatever they were told, and we had a good time. So we do what we can to teach the next generation, and if they'll come back to it someday, we'll be thrilled.
So the group that you're currently associated with here in this area is called PKM, and it's a Philadelphia group, right? So tell our listeners a little bit about that group in particular, because this would be the sort of the local group if they wanted to get involved, if they hear this podcast about Polish dance and are attracted to it, and this is something that they could conceivably get involved with.
Right. Okay. So I'd love to. So Pete, first of all, if you live near Philadelphia, and even if you're in New Jersey like us, you can drive to Philadelphia. It's 45, 50 minutes away. It's an easy drive. And we rehearse on Friday nights. And PKM stands for something in Polish.
Polskie Kolko Między Kolegialne.
Say that again, Peter.
Polskie Kolko Między Kolegialne.
Which is why we call it PKM. So much easier for everybody to say it. It always welcomes new members, and you don't have to be Polish to be part of it. You don't have to have dance experience. It's not necessary. All you have to have is a desire to dance, and we'll help you through it. And we have a website and some Facebook pages you can go to.
So as Andrea mentioned, PKM practices on Friday nights at the Associated Polish Home, 9150 Academy Road. And you can go to their website, pkmdancers.org. There are other dance groups in the area. There's Janosik in Baltimore. There's a couple, Ojczyzna, and I mentioned New York, Polish American Folk Dance Company. So no matter where you are in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, Baltimore area, you can find something that's relatively close.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like essentially wherever you are in the world, you can find a dance group. And certainly wherever you are in this sort of Northeast corridor, you can definitely find them. And they're within hours of each other. So, I mean, I think that there's a sense of, with this podcast, we're trying to get people to just appreciate their Polish culture, but also to understand the relevance of it. A lot of this stuff, this sort of the history of Poland or the cultural elements, people, they eat pierogi, pronouncing it wrong, and dance the polka. And if that is your only exposure to Polish culture, and you don't have an interest in those two things, that can be where it ends. And yet when you understand that we have this massive bevy of Polish culture and heritage that's infused in these dances, it can open up so much to you. And then you talked about the social aspect of it too.
Definitely. There's the social aspect, there's the historical connections. You learn about the history of the dances, and you find out that the Krakowiak is 500 years old or something like that. And that some of these things were ballroom dances of their time. I've been studying the Polish language all of my life, didn't grow up speaking it, but when you're in dancing, you also sing, and you have to learn the language in order to sing the songs, and you figure out what you're singing about. You go to workshops and the instructors are teaching in Polish, and you just figure out what they're saying by imitation and following instructions. So you learn so many things about the history and the language and the music that it really becomes a connection to the entire culture of the Polish American experience.
My thoughts go to the social aspect you were talking about, because there have been so many marriages made in dance groups. It's just incredible. And a lot of times, when you're a high school or a college male, you come into the dance group looking for a partner, And sometimes you end up with one just like us. So you
And
find
myself as well.
that's right. You meet your best friend and you meet your life partner, and you just keep on dancing through life, and it's kind of neat and very blessed to be doing so.
Yeah, definitely. The diaspora word of being spread out, and we have an area here that is still very rich with a lot of Polish culture, Polish American culture, and it's just a short drive away. It really is. Whether it's in Camden, where our church is, or up in Northeast Philly, neither of which are far from each other by any stretch, and you can get involved if you want to, and it's very enriching. It is very enriching.
Absolutely.
It beats sitting home watching TV.
You're playing on your phone.
That's right. Yeah.
Because it is too. It's like you see. I feel like every time I see all these, it's like people trying to show off their like workouts and their this get fit culture, and it's like, well, one of the best things you could probably do, one of the most intense workouts would be, as we've said, dancing the mazur. But any of the dances, really, there is that kind of physical component to it.
Absolutely. It's a great way to put down the social media and pick up the social dancing.
I think that's great. That would be a great tagline. Peter and Andrea, thank you so very much for being on Pilgrimage to Prayer. We really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Our April saint of the month is Saint Stanislaus, bishop and martyr. In Polish, Święty Stanisław Szczepanowski, biskup i męczennik. His feast day is celebrated on April the 11th, and he lived from 1030 to 1079. Much legend surrounds the life of Stanislaus, and the details are relatively few. What is known is that he was born into a privileged and devout family in the village of Chopin, outside of Kraków. His parents were childless through most of their life and saw the birth of their only son as a miraculous gift from God. Educated for the priesthood and giving his large inheritance to the poor, he gained status as a preacher and for his holiness. A humble man, he was reluctantly elected as Archbishop of Kraków, but went on to great success in the position, founding various monasteries and working for the expansion of the church in Poland. However, he soon ran afoul of King Bolesław II, whose cruelty and immorality Stanislaus preached against. After Stanislaus excommunicated him, Bolesław was so enraged that he personally murdered Stanislaus while the archbishop celebrated Mass, gruesomely dismembering and spreading his body throughout the land. The martyrdom galvanized the kingdom, and Bolesław was forced to flee to Hungary. Various legends surround Stanislaus's life, including stories of his raising of a dead man to testify on the church's behalf in a land dispute, and that after his martyrdom, the pieces of his body were miraculously reunited and guarded by eagles until they could be collected for burial. His magnificent tomb sits in the center of Wawel Cathedral in Kraków. He is venerated as the principal patron saint of Poland, with numerous churches in Polonia dedicated to him. The ancient hymn, Gaude Mater Polonia, Rejoice, O Mother Poland, recounts his life and is traditionally sung at the opening of the academic year in Polish colleges and universities. Reflection. Throughout our lives, there are moments that challenge our convictions. From an early age, bullies in school teach us what it is like to be confronted by aggression and cruelty. As we grow, there are times where we are criticized for standing up for what we know is right. Other times, we face a sense of responsibility in living up to expectations from our families or in our careers. All the while, we face untold difficulties that test our faith and our strength. The death of loved ones, feelings of failure, the loss of a job, property, or health. In each of these situations, we hope that we will do what Jesus would expect of us: However, many times we fall short. These are feelings that are uncomfortable at best, crippling at worst. As great as our struggles seem to be, imagine the burden that Stanislaus faced in living up to expectations in 10th century Poland. As the only child of a devout couple, and as one of the earliest Polish bishops in a land still relatively new to Christianity, he surely felt a great burden. The pressures of not wanting to let down his family, church, or people was likely very real. How many times can we picture him asking, "Why me, Lord?" or "God, give me the strength to stand up for this"? And in standing up for what was right, he even challenged the king, the greatest secular authority of the day. How many of us would be so bold? His story would also foreshadow that of the nation at large. Like Stanislaus's legend, Poland's struggle in standing up for itself to its aggressive neighbors resulted in its being beaten, dismembered, and rising several times over the course of its history. Each time, the Polish people struggled to hold on to their identity in the face of unimaginable circumstances. Our ancestors, like Stanislaus, were tested time and again by forces outside of their control. Although the vast majority of us will not be faced with consequences as serious as martyrdom or the turbulent times that define Polish history, we can find in the story of Stanislaus and Poland the strength in facing the worst moments of our lives. Despite the challenges that often led to their suffering and death, Stanislaus and Poland found their strength in their devotion to God. Reflection questions. Recalling the times in my life when I faced difficult challenges, I remember how I responded. How does my response mirror that of St. Stanislaus? If it is lacking, how can I learn from this for the future? Stanislaus had the courage to stand up to the most powerful people of his day. In what ways do I feel called in today's world to stand up to negative voices of hatred and violence in our city, state, country, and world? Much suffering and need can be found in the world around us. How can I best work for the betterment of the communities that I am called to serve?
Hopefully our discussion with Peter and Andrea, as well as our look at the life of the principal patron of Poland, Stanislaus, Bishop and Martyr, made for an enjoyable time with us today. If this topic has spurred your interest in checking out traditional Polish folk dancing yourself, be sure to visit our social media pages for more information on how you can get involved in our area. Also, PKM Polish Folk Dance Ensemble, of which Peter and Andrea are members, have an exciting anniversary event later this month that we will share as well on our pages and link to their website. Likewise, as I mentioned during our interview, we are followed by and follow dozens of Polish folk dance groups around the world on our podcast Instagram page. I encourage you to check out some of these amazing groups to explore the sheer variety of diverse places that Polish folk dancers operate and view some of their truly extraordinary performances. Additionally, if you belong to one of these dance groups, please kindly tag us to let us know you're listening, as well as what your feedback is on today's episode. As always, if you've enjoyed our podcast, please kindly leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. I truly can't emphasize enough how this greatly improves our visibility, as well as when you follow our social media pages. Lastly, as this will be our final podcast before the celebration of Easter, we would like to wish you a happy and joy-filled holiday. If you are seeking a place to spend your Easter morning in a proper Polish fashion, there will be a 10 o'clock a.m. Mass on Easter Sunday at St. Joseph's Church, and you can check out the schedule for the entire Easter Triduum on our social media pages or the Cathedral and Apostolic websites. Also, on Holy Saturday, the day before Easter Sunday, we will be holding the traditional Easter blessing of baskets known as the Świątonka. The times for this all-important Polish blessing are 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 1 o'clock p.m.
With that, I wish you Wesolego, Alleluja, and a happy Easter. Until next time, saute some pierogi and sit with the saint. Thank you, dziękujemy, and do usłyszenia.